I would ask you to think about the last time you were a beginner, because if it's been a long time, maybe that's why you're terrified. Maybe you are still meant to follow this path. At least that's what I'm hoping for, because that's what I'm betting on for the next however many months it takes to get this going. Hello, you're listening to The Head of the Table. I'm Nora Riddle, I'm your host, and I'm a former policy advisor, former chief of staff in corporate America, and your advisor on all things leadership. And today we're talking about going from being an expert in one field to being a beginner in another field. That's right. We're going to be talking about how I launched a business, dove headfirst into content creation, and how it's going 6 weeks in. I really wanted to talk about this because, first and foremost, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in a field that I've just dove into. But I think that there's some things I've learned already, and I want to share them with you as I go through this journey, because it's so much more acceptable to be a beginner when you're 15, 18, 22, when you're in school or just coming out of school or just entering a field. It's so much more understandable to be a beginner. But as we've kind of talked about in previous episodes, in this economy and this world with access to technology, it's becoming more and more common for you to completely pivot in your career and be a beginner all over again. Because I don't think it's traditional to stay in one field your entire life. And even if you do stay in your field, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, content creation is becoming a huge deal. And I think a lot of people are getting new skill sets as they progress in their career. So I wanted to talk about this journey. It's by no means my first time pivoting. While I've spent around the last nearly 10 years in the international affairs space, it's a pretty big field. So I've been in the private sector, I've been in the public sector, I've traveled a bunch for work doing international organization work, which means I've done negotiations to try to get countries to agree to statements on actions that they want to take on certain issue sets like economic development. And I've also done a lot of research work. I've done a lot of strategy, business development work. I've really run the gamut, but it's all been in the international affairs space. And it's really challenging to go from being the person in the room that everyone looks to, that has built up their reputation through the years, to someone that doesn't really know what they're doing and honestly kind of feels like they already fell flat on their face on the concrete. I wanted to talk a little bit about the experience of, one, how I got into content creation and that process. Two, how I launched a business and how that's going. And three, how do you really embrace being a beginner throughout your life? I want to take a step back and realize that I'm only 6 weeks into this, and some of this information is going to be perfectly accurate, and some of this information might be completely wrong. But I'm learning for you, so let's dive in. First and foremost, I had a little bit of experience with content creation, really more short form content creation. I love a good TikTok reel. I love Instagram. I love all the fall foliage photos. I have a dog, and I dove into pet Instagram for a while during COVID because it was just a fun distraction. But a lot of my experience is not longer form content, particularly not recording and editing. So how did I get into this? I did have a little bit of a hack. I talked to my fiance and I said, help. I asked for, how do I do lighting? How do I do recording? How do I edit? And thankfully, I have some amazing people in my life. Some people have podcasts and they've been so helpful as I've asked them a million questions. I've had people that have recommended certain technology. I've had people help me with purchasing the technology, because you start out and like I spent like over $1,000 on technology just to like have a setup that I can talk to people, because I figured if I'm going to do it, let's dive in. And I really, really thought if I had a good message and some decent equipment, that I could just put my message out into the world and I would have all of these followers and it would just be meant to be. You know, this was my big pivot. I got laid off at the end of July, and this is why it all makes sense. Until I got to my third video, and I think I had like 0 listens and views on an episode that I was so proud of for like 3 weeks. It was really rough. And it was then that I realized why so many podcasts fail. Because it's really hard. Our brain is hardwired in a way that dopamine hits encourage us to continue down a path. It's why so many people fall into people pleasing. It's why so many people are like the teacher's pet. It's why so many people strive so hard academically and then to like seek promotions in the working world. Our like brain is literally hardwired for this. And it was really hard to go through really like the first month of this and feel like I was having like no results. And to the followers that I do have out there, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to be honest, what motivated me is, I don't know if you've seen Michelle Carre's like most recent really cool stunt that she did, where she's like holding on to the side of an airplane, like a military airplane, like without a parachute. Like she's so cool. And she talked about how she started out her career or her channel with shooting videos of her trying different Starbucks drinks. And that was just so encouraging to me of how far she's grown. And that's when it hit me. I'm a beginner. Of course, I have no idea what I'm doing. Of course, I have like no views half the time. It's because I'm figuring it out. And I think when we first exit college, or when we're in college, or if you're abroad, it's called university, or you're in like high school, really any sort of academic setting, it's completely okay to fail. Like it is completely okay to not know what you're doing. It's completely okay to like be a beginner, because society tells you that you are a beginner. And I think that's why maybe some people keep going back to academia, because it is that comfortable space. And I've thought about that of like, do I go to graduate school? Do I go to law school? Like, do I go back to where it's okay to be a beginner? And then I realized I'm already there. I'm just not paying someone else to tell me that it's okay to be here. I'm just rolling with it. But as soon as it clicked for me that I was a beginner, I was like, I need to go back to school. I need to figure it out. I have been listening a lot to Colin and Samir, which if you like haven't checked out their stuff, it's so cool. They talk about podcasting, they talk about YouTube, they talk with so many different content creators, and it's been so helpful for me trying to figure out how to elevate my platform on YouTube, how to connect with viewers on Spotify, like how to really pull people into what I'm doing. Because when I was laid off at the end of July, I was laying on the green couch that I normally record on, lamenting about how I loved my job and I didn't want to leave. But sometimes life has something else in mind. And I thought, maybe I don't have the platform I used to have, but I'd like to have it. I would like to be in a place where I can connect with leaders, where I can connect with, you know, the private sector, with so many different aspiring people, to help advise them become the best versions of themselves. Because at the end of the day, when you're advising, you know, global leaders, or you're advising CEOs or directors or partners, it is about helping them make the best choices to help the people that they're responsible for. And that's what I want to do. Maybe I have to start a little bit smaller and maybe I have to start from square one, but that's okay. I've fallen on my face, flat on the concrete, plenty of other times at other points in my career. There's been times that I've turned in reports that were awful and had to start over. I remember in particular in my first job, I would have to write these like little write ups of meetings I had been in. And I would be so excited when I saw a word I could identify because the entire paragraph would be rewritten. And it's really just embracing that. Like, I am in content creation, I am in coaching, and I'm in consulting. And while maybe I've done consulting before, this is a little bit different. And so I'm a complete beginner and I'm having to learn again. And that's kind of how content creation is going. Stay tuned to see what happens as I continue to grow over the following months and hopefully years. But we all have to start somewhere, man. When it comes to launching my business, I was over the moon. I worked so hard on my website. I worked for a month straight, came up with all these great products, and it didn't go the way I expected. I had this idea that I really wanted to bring together kind of leadership and healing, well-being, something like that. Over the course of the last 5 years, I've completely changed my life with simplified EFT. It's called emotional freedom technique. It was developed by psychologists, and it's rooted in Chinese medicine because you tap on pressure points that are rooted in Chinese medicine. But you're kind of rewiring your brain. You're replacing beliefs like, I could never run a mile, to I am so strong and my body is so supportive of me that I can be physically active whenever I want to, for example. And I had this grand idea, and I don't think anybody knew what I was talking about. So I completely changed my website. At the end of the day, I really want to help with career counseling, career coaching. I want people to have the opportunities that I had. And I had to talk to so many people, so many coffees, so many cold calls or emails. And that's what I'm having to do again because I'm in a new field and I don't know what I'm doing. And that's okay. Because it doesn't mean that you're incompetent. It doesn't mean the idea is bad. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that you're a beginner. And I really want to share that experience with you. So check out the new website. I do 30-minute sessions around career coaching. So if you have a specific issue set, like maybe you have a promotion coming up and you want some strategy to make sure that you can highlight to your bosses every single way that you show up and you already encapsulate that position that you're trying to get promoted into. Or maybe you just kind of need a bit of an overhaul. I have an hour-long coaching session that we can do to sit down and strategize how you can do that career pivot, how you can really get to the next place. And I also have a free career success blueprint that you can follow that helps you outline your goals, take actionable steps, and how to stay accountable. But that aside, I'm still figuring it out because I'm new to this space. And I think taking the moment to realize that maybe an idea hasn't come to fruition the way that you want and scrapping it and starting over is completely acceptable. It's part of the process. I think it's a lot easier to kind of make those mistakes when you work for a company or an organization because there's someone that will kind of check you or help you and say, maybe this isn't the best idea, or maybe you're missing a piece. And I think that's a challenging thing when you step up into leadership, you become your own boss, you start your own business, is there's not a person to do that. And so what I've done is relied on my friends, my family, and former colleagues to kind of run ideas by them. Before I came out with my blueprint, I ran it by a couple of my closest friends who are both in business to say, hi, can you please tear this apart? Because if you don't understand it, and I've talked endlessly to you about this idea, no one else is going to understand it. And it was so helpful. And I came up with like a better product. So as you're trying to kind of take that next step, whether you're a leader or you're a business owner, rely on your community, because doing this alone is going to end up with you being lonely, isolated, and maybe crying on your couch. The last thing I really wanted to talk about is kind of your branding and how to come up with that. And I really struggled with this because when I think of branding, I think of like Flo from Progressive or like the Starbucks lady, where you have such like a clear image of what like a brand is, what a product is. But it feels kind of transactional to make like you as a person that brand. And so I really struggled with this. At first, I was just like, oh, like let my work speak for myself, which if you are someone who has ever tried to let your work just speak for yourself, let me tell you now, yeah, it doesn't work. Doesn't work. You may have that niche that's going to fill that need, but that doesn't mean you're going to make it. And I had to kind of shift my perspective and use some of my past experience. At the State Department, they don't call it personal branding. They call it your corridor reputation. And one, that's because for some reason, every government building ever has a million corridors or hallways, if you don't know what corridor is. Your corridor reputation means like when two people kind of pass each other or chatting in the corridor and they talk about you, they have things to say and hopefully they're positive. So I learned that phrase very, very early on, and it was very easy in at least the field I was in. I kind of talked with people and I was like, how do I come up with a good corridor reputation? And it's like, do, good work, show up on time, be responsive. Like it was a little bit more traditional, like what you would think of like, do a good job. But I think with time, I like figured out my personality. I figured out where I stood in the field. But I've struggled with figuring out that transition and content creation as being a coach. Like, if you are starting in a field and you're new, how do you build that reputation? You need people to take a chance on you. You need people to watch your videos. You need people to subscribe to your channel. You need people to invest in you. And figuring out how to connect with people is part of that. And to be honest, I haven't fully figured that out. I do think I figured out it's time to set down the statistics. Oops, econ major, old habits die hard, man. But I think I have figured out that the more I can share and be authentic and be myself, I'm hoping that connects with people, because at the end of the day, we're all beginners at life, aren't we? We're all beginners at figuring out what we want and how to accomplish it. Whether we're an expert in our fields, in our career, or we're just starting out, there's always going to be parts of life where you're a beginner. And I do think kind of diving in and recognizing that being a beginner can be a really, really good thing. And if you're feeling uncomfortable being a beginner, I would ask you to think about the last time you were a beginner, because if it's been a long time, maybe that's why you're terrified. Maybe you are still meant to follow this path. At least that's what I'm hoping for, because that's what I'm betting on for the next however many months it takes to get this going. I know I'm meant to be here, and you're meant to be wherever you're feeling called to be too. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Head of the Table podcast. Please feel free to check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and on our LinkedIn page. And if you're looking to find a way to connect, feel free to check out my website. It has all the podcast episodes, and also it has more information about me, my coaching business,